Hello, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining me today. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And we'll start off with just a couple housekeeping items today. First of all, this is just to let you know that this is the first installment of a 3-part free webinar series. And this is all about helping you understand how to develop AI's, or how to develop security programs that secure AI developed applications. So the first one is today. That's the one you're listening to right now. It's called the AppSec IMPACT Framework. In this webinar, I'm going to talk to you about some of the things that I've learned over the last 24 years in my career in AppSec and in security in general, and what I've understood after developing 5 programs from the ground up, what works and what doesn't work. Next week on Monday, we're going to talk about the 4-layer AppSec automation stack. This is going to dive into some of the things like the free scan tools that you can use, open source and free scan tools that you can start using immediately. And then the final one is next Wednesday, and that's going to be a live GitHub build. And so now we're going to kind of take everything that we've talked about over the first 2 series and do it live, actually build a GitHub action pipeline that does some scanning and does something that you can use. So I'm excited to have you. Thanks for joining me. I know there are lots of other things that you could be doing today, and I appreciate you being here. So let's go ahead and jump in. First of all, this is the registration link. So I highly encourage you to register. What you'll get if you register is you'll get the slide deck after this ends. You'll get all of the links and materials that come with it. You'll also get a completion certificate. So it's middle of November. Some of you are probably looking for certification CEUs and CPEs to help maintain certifications. You'll get a certification or a certificate from me saying that you attended this, which you can then submit to whoever it is, IC Squared or whoever. And then you'll also get reminders for the remaining webinars. So I've got my team that's kind of watching the chat. I'll have them drop the link in the chat now so that you can just click on that instead of having to copy it from the slides here. And then as we go, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll be honest, I do a horrible job monitoring chat while I'm talking. It's hard enough to talk. I definitely can't chew bubble gum and walk at the same time. So they'll be kind of keeping an eye on things, and they'll try to let me know if there's anything urgent. Otherwise, just kind of put them in there, and at the end, I'll save time so that we can talk about that. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is 3 things, really. First of all, the future, what AI-driven development is doing to change the landscape, why the traditional things that we've been doing in application security really don't scale and really fail, and then the path forward. And really, this is setting the foundation for everything that we'll do in this 3-part series. So I'm glad you're here, and this is really important foundational stuff. Okay, so let's talk about the future really quick. So I think everyone would probably agree with me when I say the job market is wonky right now. It's tough to find a job. We've gone through this really weird change in the market, and we've got new graduates who are coming into the field who are really struggling to find their first gig. We've got experienced engineers with years, sometimes decades of experience who've been laid off and can't find their next role, or people who are employed and worried about the next layoff and whether it'll impact them. It's tough. And I want to acknowledge that up front. It's also interesting because AI is changing so much, and I think everyone understands that there's this need to upskill and gain new skills and build your resume, but it's changing so fast. It's hard to know, what's going to be the winner, what LLM, what models, what tools, what development tools should you be focusing on when there's a new one every week, it seems like, and a new leader, a new winner every week. And then on top of that, as if security teams weren't far enough behind, AI-driven development is churning out more code faster, and which means that we're finding more vulnerabilities faster. And we'll dig into those details in a little bit here, but it's creating this really difficult time. And so part of the reason I wanted to do this webinar series is to give some hope, to give maybe a little bit of optimistic view of the future and to help you prepare for it. So I want to start off with this report. So DORA is a Google project. They publish research on what drives software delivery and operations. And recently they published this report on the state of AI-assisted development. And what they found, the main key finding is that they call AI the great amplifier. And there's 2 sides of this. It's a double-edged sword. On one hand, if you've got things really solid, you've got solid processes, you've got a good platform, your development tools are working well, your security program is working well, it's going to magnify those strengths. You're going to be able to churn out more code, more features, more products faster, and they will be good. But on the flip side, if you've got dysfunctions and deficiencies in your programs, whether it's on the development side or on the security side, it's going to magnify those dysfunctions and deficiencies in the form of more vulnerabilities that take longer to fix, more features that are shipping faster without a security review, without a scan, without a pen test, with all of those things. It's going to magnify and amplify that. And so some of the other findings that were interesting coming out of that is, first of all, AI adoption, no surprise, is near universal. Of all of the people that they interviewed for this survey, 90% report using AI at work. Now, they didn't differentiate how many of those were allowed to use AI at work and how many were not. 90% were using it. The second key factor there, the second key finding, was that the user input was key. And really, so the engineers and the teams that were using AI effectively were the ones that were pointing at a clear problem. They had a purpose for it. They weren't just using AI for the sake of using AI. But then they also had user in the loop. Somebody who was providing input and monitoring the output and making sure that it was providing the output that they wanted it to. And I like to define this as kind of the 80-20 rule. 80-20 works with so many different scenarios, but in this case, the 20% is the human input. And I like to think of, if you spend 10% up front, guiding it, pointing it at that clear problem, giving it the context, let AI do, or let the LLM do the 80% of the heavy lifting, and then you spend 10% at the end checking, providing feedback, and making sure it provides the right output, you're probably going to be in a good state. The problem is that I'm seeing is that a lot of engineers go to this because they want the easy button. They want to just be able to churn out more code quickly, and they don't want to think about it. The folks who are doing it right are spending the extra time up front and at the end to make sure that what's being developed is consistent with their quality bar. And so that is really key. And it goes not just for development teams, but for security teams as well. And then the last thing is the platform engineering was really the foundation. And when Dora talks about platform, they're talking about the tools, the processes, the methodologies, and how it all strings together for a development team, how they get from requirements or PRD all the way into production, their code into production. And so making sure that those tools work seamlessly and that the requirements are fulfilled and that the 80-20 rule is being fulfilled all along the way is super, super critical. So I kind of feel like there's this great opportunity. And it's similar, if you go back in the early days of cloud computing, those of you who were in security know that cloud computing was really scary at that time. We couldn't imagine how you could secure running your sensitive data on somebody else's machine in somebody else's data center. It just couldn't be done. What we didn't think was possible at the time is that cloud security or cloud computing could actually make security easier in some ways. And certainly there were a lot of failures along the way, and there are failures today. But we couldn't conceive of the possibility that cloud computing could actually make our jobs easier. So the AI opportunity is among us. It's scary right now. There's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of bad things happening. But I think it's clear that it's here to stay. It's not going away. And there's a pretty bright opportunity for anybody who can help guide that migration towards a successful future with AI. And that includes understanding how to integrate security, how to build those stable and secure platforms so that you can churn out that code with the AI tools and have it meet your requirements and your quality bar at the end. So let's talk quickly about why traditional processes fail and why traditional AppSec processes fail. So AI development tools, not surprisingly, they're churning out more code, they're doing it faster, and a lot of times there's less code comprehension. Again, a lot of the people who are using AI, it's because they don't want to think about it. And so naturally, if you're not thinking about the code it's generating and you're not proofreading the code after it's generated, there's going to be less code comprehension, which is resulting in more vulnerabilities being generated faster, more efficiently. And that kind of goes back to, there's a few studies that have been done, and I know there's many studies out there, and some of them contradict each other, But as I looked across the board, the one that I felt was probably the most believable said that completing code tasks using AI development tools resulted in roughly a 21% increase in productivity. So code being churned out 20% more efficiently or faster. But then the other study was that 45% of AI code is vulnerable, had some sort of vulnerabilities. Now, it didn't differentiate whether those were critical vulnerabilities or low risk or what, just that code is vulnerable. So if you're churning out code with 21% greater speed and 45% of that code is vulnerable, obviously we're setting ourselves up for a problem. To kind of double tap on that, traditionally, AppSec touch points have kind of fallen into 4 or 5 different categories. And if you look across the industry, if you start early on, design reviews and threat models, only about 60% of applications across the industry are getting design reviews and threat models. And if you kind of dig into that a little bit deeper, you find that there's only about 27% of the organizations who are threat modeling greater than 75% of their apps. So this is really kind of a minority. In some cases, some organizations are doing well, but many are not. Many are missing the bar completely here. Code scanning. So we're talking about static analysis, software composition analysis, and things like that. 50 to 60% of orgs scan code at some level, but the majority don't test all of their applications. And that's probably by design, and that's probably okay because not all applications or not all code is created equally. Some applications are really significant and important and risky, and others we don't care about as much. So that's probably okay, but there's obviously a gap there. Penetration testing. This is probably the biggest number. 70% of orgs perform regular pen test. Now, my question there is, what does regular mean? I suspect it probably means an annual pen test that is in support of some compliance regime, PCI or whatever. And if you've done those, you know that oftentimes when pen tests are the result of a compliance requirement, oftentimes they're not really comprehensive. They're trying to do the bare minimum necessary to get that PCI certification and to pass the audit. So that may be a little bit of a false sense of security there, that 70% of orgs that perform regular pen tests, but it's perhaps the reality. Vulnerability remediation is lagging for most organizations. 60 to 150 days it takes to remediate vulnerabilities. For public sector organizations, that's closer to 315 days. Obviously, there's a lot of dwell time there for vulnerabilities to be exploited, and that's not good. And then only about 40% of organizations are taking advantage of runtime protections. So this paints a pretty dismal picture for the state of traditional AppSec touch points and how well they're being expanded. And it kind of leads to a few different failure modes. One is the bottleneck, and it's where you're blocking pull requests, you're blocking progress, you're standing in the way of development teams getting their work into production. And oftentimes what happens there, if you're not able to keep up, teams bypass you. The second one is kind of the surface review. So you get to the point where you realize, okay, I can't keep up with everything, therefore I need to focus my efforts on the most important things, and I'm going to do a lightweight review of everything else. Problem is that results in missing issues, and no security engineer likes to miss issues, and so there's this real tendency to not go that route. It sounds great on paper, but to go do lighter reviews, light touch reviews or whatever, security engineers resist that. And then when you start missing things, obviously the organization isn't happy with it either. And then the final one is, okay, burnout. We're just going to work hard and do all of the things because it's really important, and we rely on humans to do this. Unsustainable workloads. The problem is that results in, burnout, which I think is just a bad case anyway, from a human perspective. You shouldn't be burning people out. That's poor form. But also from the business perspective, we rely on security engineers and engineers in general to make high judgment calls, high judgment decisions, and to be able to operate efficiently, right? So if you're burning people out, those engineers, when they get to those decision points where they need to make a high judgment call, high judgment decision, they're not able to do that efficiently. And so it's really bad for the business, and it's really bad for people. Just don't do it. Incidentally, I've seen these failure modes at almost every organization I've worked at. one organization, which I won't work at, I saw all three at the same time. It's a tough situation, and it's a reality for a lot of people. But I hate to be doom and gloom. I very much agree with this quote. Every adversity, every failure, every heartache carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. And that's where that opportunity is. I truly believe that the security engineers who lean into this AI development thing and learn it and understand it and figure out how to guide their organizations to a successful outcome will be the engineers who are in demand in the future. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what we can do. So first of all, what won't work? More manual work is not going to do it. We're turning out more code, more vulnerabilities faster. You're probably not going to be able to hire fast enough to keep up with the pace of the speed of new code and new vulnerabilities turned out. So manual work is not going to do it. It's never been the right approach, but even more so now. Burning people out, not going to do it. Those people are not going to make the right decisions. They're going to move on to greener pastures and all those things. And that reputation is going to follow your team. Hoping things will change. We liked to say when I was at Amazon, hope is not a plan. Hoping is it's good to have hope, but you got to have a plan to go with it. And blaming others, blaming the development team is never an effective way to go about things. In the 24 years I've been doing this, I have never met a developer who woke up in the morning and said, you know what, I want to write insecure code today. I want to see how many critical vulnerabilities I can churn out. Now, I'm sure there are some of those developers out there, and they're probably, agents of foreign governments and such. But the ones that I've met and interacted with, they want to do a good job. And doing a secure job is on par with doing a good job. So blaming people is not going to work. And then finally, buying a tool as an easy button. So many teams, so many security engineers feel like if they just buy that tool, if I just buy Wiz, if I just buy Okta or Cloudflare, it's going to fix all of my problems. Well, we know that it doesn't fix all of your problems, and in fact, it oftentimes introduces more problems. So don't view tools as the knight in shining armor. It's not going to fix all of your problems. Okay, so let me introduce quickly the AppSec IMPACT framework. And again, this is something as I thought through the lessons that I've learned over my career, worked at SAP, at Amazon, AWS, as well as Disney. These are some of the things that I've learned that work and don't work as you work with development teams. And it can be a difficult transition to make. I've often said that oftentimes it's easier to take a development engineer and teach them the security so that they can function in AppSec than it is to teach a traditional security engineer the development fundamentals. It's not impossible, but the reason for that is because when developers transition into security, they already know the workflows, they already know the tools, they know how things work. And because of that, they can integrate much more better with those teams. So let's talk about I as integrate. Great segue. Meet developers where they work. So I think the anti-pattern here are teams that say, hey, we just bought this tool, whether it's Wiz or Checkmarks or SemGrep or whatever, and we've got this dashboard, we've got all of these issues, these vulnerabilities, and we need you guys to come and take a look at this and fix them. The problem is that forces developers to get out of their normal flow state. So they're no longer working in their tools, in their methodologies, and doing the things that they know how to do. Now they have to kind of have that context switch, and they have to, first of all, remember to go and check your portal and your reports and go and do that work. And it's not the path of least resistance. It's greater resistance because they have to leave what they're doing and what they know and how they get their work done. So what's better is to meet them where they are, which means, use the bug tracking systems that they're using, use the requirements tracking systems that they're using, integrate in continuous integration and continuous development, CI/CD. So build your security scans into their pipelines, go to their code repositories, integrate there, and go to their development environments, their development tools, and make sure that you integrate there. So this is all super critical, and it's becoming honestly a little bit easier with AI. For instance, integrating with the IDE or the development environment used to be really difficult. There were tools available for it, but they were all pretty much awful. I haven't tried them recently, but I kind of gave up on them years ago because they were bloated, they were slow, developers hated them, they hated having this thing in their development environment that slowed things down. But now integrating with the development environment is super easy. It could be as simple as a markdown file, security.md, that has your security rules and your requirements and the things that you want that coding agent to do. And so it's actually become much easier with AI, ironically, right? So make sure that you understand their flow, their processes, how they do their work. That's, I think, the biggest part, the thing that I would try to ram home with you today is that if you don't understand how developers do their work, it's going to be really hard to integrate with them. So invest the time. It is a fairly substantial investment, but it's worth it. Okay, the next thing is measure. So this is all about metrics, dashboards, all of those things, which I feel is an integral part of our security programs that we build. Unfortunately, most security teams do metrics and dashboards completely wrong. So let me paint the picture. Typically what happens is you start this new program, you roll out this new tool, whatever, this new initiative, and then you've got your weekly business review or your quarterly business reviews or whatever, and you develop metrics right before that meeting to bring into that meeting to show the executives and your stakeholders how well your program is performing. And then you forget about those metrics until the next instance of that meeting, and it's all about visibility, right? It's saying, I've taken this amount of cash, this team or whatever, and I've created this impact, and here's the metrics that prove that. Those are vanity metrics, and well, in some ways they're important. And believe me, I've been in organizations where visibility was more important than the impact. So, you had to have visibility with the right people. It didn't really matter if you were doing a good job if the right people didn't know you were doing it, right? So I get it. And I think that's in large measure why people default to vanity metrics. But I want to introduce what I feel is this term called metric-driven security. And it derives from this concept called test-driven development. And if you're not familiar with it, let me just kind of recap test-driven development and what it means. So oftentimes when developers write code, they'll write all the functionality, they'll write the code, and then they'll go back and write the tests later. And oftentimes what that results in is insufficient testing. Code that gets shipped because it works, but we don't have testing to make sure that it continues to work and that we don't have issues crop up that cause regressions. So this test-driven development movement, if you will, is it starts with a requirement. So you take a requirement, maybe the requirement is I need a login page that accepts a username and a password, it has a submit button, and it has a reset password link. So instead of developing that form first, you go out and you write the test. So you test what needs to be in place for that requirement to be fulfilled, and the test is failing. And so at that point, you write just enough code to make that test pass, and then you move on to the next requirement. You write the test fails, you write just enough code to make that test pass. And so we can adopt that same attitude with metrics in security. So instead of defining or building the program first, you define the outcome metrics you want to see. What is it that I want? What goal is it that I want to achieve? So maybe it's, I want to have 90% of my high-risk applications onboarded for static analysis. Okay, great. So now I've got this goal. So now I can go and develop the metrics. Well, what do I need to do to measure how many applications I have, how many of them are high risk, and how many of them are onboarded for static analysis? So now I've got the metric, and that's red, right? That's showing probably at the outset 0%. And then I go and build the program to start showing progress on that. And then I can track progress as that metric is continuously measuring our progress. And that allows you not only to demonstrate success, but it also allows you to run your business to see if you're making continual progress, or if you're adding, or if you're delayed or blocked. So my recommendation is avoid vanity metrics. Vanity metrics are metrics just for the sake of metrics, to show that you're doing a good job. But if you're spending time before a meeting to get metrics ready for a slide deck, that's probably a good indicator that they're vanity metrics. And that's not a good. If you've been in that situation before, like I have been, it's busy work. It's kind of painful. You've got to do it in some cases. But if you take the time up front to develop it in more of a metric-driven way, you can get more benefit out of that. So that's the metrics piece. Next one, the P in impact is prove. And so the anti-pattern here, or the old method, is you get a pen test or you do a scan and you generate this PDF report that's 250 pages and you give that to the development team and say, hey, here's this list of bad things. I need you to fix it right away. And by the way, our PCI audit is next month, so could you do it like in the next 2 weeks, right? That doesn't work well. And one of the reasons it doesn't work well is it burns trust with developers. You and I both know that 250-page report is replete with false positives. And naturally, when somebody reads that and they get to the point where they encounter their first false positive, they're going to throw that out. Like, why would I continue working with this if you haven't even taken the time to vet these issues and triage them and make sure they're actual vulnerabilities? So we want to move from theoretically exploitable to a practical risk. And we can do that in a few ways. Now, before I get into this, one pitfall that people will fall into is by feeling like they have to prove that everything is exploitable. And I would caution that, because you don't want to get in a situation where teams won't work on a vulnerability until you can prove that it's exploitable. And that's a bad place to be, because let's face it, as good as you may be, if you fail to prove that something is exploitable, that doesn't necessarily mean that someone else can't exploit that. So sorry about the double negatives there, but there should be a certain amount that you need to do. And if you can prove that it's exploitable, that's really impactful. But that shouldn't be the requirement for everything that we work on. So at a minimum, we should have clear repro steps. The person who's working on this should be able to walk through and understand why it's an issue and how to reproduce it in their code so that they can determine if they fix it. We should indicate what the affected assets are and what the associated business impact is with that. So if you're just saying to fix something for the sake of fixing something, that doesn't really help. And especially because in a lot of these cases, you're dealing with a backlog of vulnerabilities. And so somebody could rightfully say, well, this has been vulnerable for the last 2 years and it hasn't caused an impact. So why should I work on this now? So you need to be able to show what the impact is, and then give clear recommendations. Now, this is something, as a security engineer, you're probably not the optimal developer. You're probably not an engineer, an architect in that sense. If you are, great. But you probably don't understand the exact framework and development methodologies that your team is using. So it's good to kind of give the high-level recommendations, but to leave it up to them to implement it in the proper way, right? So I never want to get in the situation where I'm saying, use this framework in this way. I want to say, here are the first principles that we want to do. We need to strip out these malicious characters. We need to encode on output or whatever. Or we need to enforce authentication and we need to fail securely, and let them determine how to implement that and be a part of guiding it. But don't necessarily enforce your view of what the implementation should be, because you may not have the full view of things. And then the last thing is help prioritize. There's that old saying, if everything is important, nothing's important. And oftentimes what happens is development teams will get these conflicting signals. So, the AppSec team will come to them and say, hey, we've got these 5 critical open source libraries that we need you to patch and update because this is the top priority. And then the GRC team will come to them and say, hey, our PCI auditor, found this issue. You need to fix this right away. And then security operations will come and say, hey, we just had this issue, this incident. We need you to go and lock this down. And so now they've got 3 different top priority issues coming from 3 different security teams, and they're confused, right? So we need to prioritize those things that we're asking these teams to do so that they know what's actually important and what we want them to work on first, second, third, etc. So make sure to prioritize that. All right, moving on, align. So this is This is super important. So the old method is, hey, this is really important. It's a security vulnerability. Hackers could do bad things. Please fix this. And that's great, but it becomes a little bit like Chicken Little. The sky is always falling. There's always a vulnerability that they could work on. There's always a critical issue. We need to align with the business priorities because, let's face it, most businesses aren't in the business of just being secure. They have customers to serve, products to sell, and they need to make the most use out of the scarce resources that they have, whether it's capital or people or whatever. And so to the extent that you can align with the priorities of the business, the better off you will be in getting your goals accomplished in securing the applications. So, and this is just a incomplete short list, but there are things that you can tie your security work to. So things like protecting revenue, enabling new revenue. Anytime that you can show that your security work, your fixing vulnerabilities is going to do that, will help the business understand the importance of it. Regulatory requirements. Some of those things you have to do. So, if you don't do, you'll get fines. You'll get potentially sued or whatever. Some of those regulatory requirements are also requirements of your customers, especially in the B2B field, right? And some of those will enable additional revenue. So if you can get FedRAMP certified, that will open up a new set of customers that you can sell to. And so all of those things are super important. Uptime. Oftentimes people fail to realize that a security exploit can often result in downtime. And so if uptime is a concern for your organization, then helping them understand the impact that your security work will have on uptime requirements will also help. Kind of touched on this already, but the customer requirements aspect, many, especially more security savvy businesses and potential customers are going to want to see proof that you're doing the right things from a security perspective. And so if you can't prove that, it becomes difficult to win that business. And the last thing is use business language. So for example, and this comes from kind of an experience I had in the past where we had a mountain of vulnerabilities that we were working through. And until I could come and explain it in terms that are important to the business. For instance, let's say you're wanting to expand to the EU next year, first quarter, and this is a blocker. Framing it in those terms is really helpful. And in my case, it helped because now suddenly the organization saw that as not just a security issue, which was important to them, but this is also blocking a key business initiative. And so now, that security work was tracked on the program tracking sheet to make sure that it got fixed. So anytime you can align with what's important with the business, take your security work and align it with those things, it's going to be more successful and you're going to be able to get more help, more visibility to it and more resources ultimately. Okay, moving on. The C is collaborate. So the old method, I think, is, security sits in this ivory tower. And you may have seen this in places where, security teams have kind of their specific area. Nobody's allowed to go in. It's super sensitive and secret and, whatever. And that's kind of the old way. And unfortunately, that gets in this situation or it burns trust with people, right? Because nobody wants to have somebody, descend from the ivory tower with their list of requirements and blow up your project. So the better way is to integrate with teams. So when I was building security programs, I wanted two things. I wanted my security engineers to know that they were responsible for a specific team. If anything came out of that, they were responsible for it. Now, it didn't mean that they did all of the work. It may mean that they come to me and say, hey, I've got more work than I can handle. I need somebody to help out with this. Great, we'll get that figured out. The second thing I wanted each team to know who on the security team they could go to when they had questions. And what that does is it builds trust and it builds rapport. And ultimately, as those individuals work with those teams, it's important because on the security team, they start to understand how those teams work. They start to understand what's important to them. And perhaps more importantly, they understand what constraints they're operating under. And that develops a sense of empathy and pragmatism, right? You understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, And so now you start to frame what you ask them in those terms. And as you do that, as you're pragmatic, people start to understand and view you as somebody who adds value, somebody who truly is there to help and not just somebody who's there to give them more work to do. The other thing is, praise in public, correct in private. So whenever a team does something great, make sure to call that out publicly. It goes a long way. Everybody likes to be called out and recognized for the good work that they do. And it creates this kind of culture of it's cool to do security things and it's appreciated. For me, the success criteria comes not necessarily in the metrics in this case. When I see engineers really doing a good job here, the teams will start doing things like coming to that individual and saying, hey, this feature's coming down the pipeline right now, and I'm worried about it. Can you come take a look at it? I want to get you involved in this early because there's some security implications. You'll have teams inviting the security engineer to team outings and things like that. To me, that's a sign that security engineer is building trust, they're integrating well with that team, and that things are working well. Now, unfortunately, I will tell you from sad experience, oftentimes other security teams are not going to understand that. And so they may see you spending time, or they may not see you spending time, and they may not see the value in that. And unfortunately, that's one of those kind of below the surface things that you don't see the things that you miss when you don't have that trust because they aren't bringing them to you. And so this is one of those things that unfortunately it doesn't stand out. It's not the type of thing that you can necessarily write in a promo doc. But it helps. It helps and it pays dividends when you start having teams trust you and come to you and invite you instead of ignoring you and avoiding you and trying to find excuses to not do the things that you're asking them to do. So this is super important. All right, the last one in the impact loop is trigger. So the old method is, we hope to fix this next week, or, we're going to put this on the backlog and we hope to get it in the next sprint. And as I said from the outset, hope is not a plan. If you don't have a plan, it's not going to get done. And a plan always involves somebody who's assigned and a date, right? And so, but even further than that, relying on the best intentions of humans eventually ends to failure. So even when you've got it assigned and you've got a due date, those due dates get kicked out. Those people leave or move teams or whatever. And so whenever you're relying on the best intentions of humans to get things done, just know eventually that's going to fail. And so you want to replace that hope and even those plans that involve a human with some sort of automation, some sort of system, some sort of process that works regardless of whether the humans remember them to work or not. And a good example of this, I think, is TLS certificates. So early on in my career, you just got, when you ordered a TLS certificate, you got minimum 12 months, sometimes as long as 24 months. And you would, it was something that you just didn't have to worry about for a while. And later in my career, I realized that a TLS certificate with a 12-month expiration is an outage that you schedule 12 months from now, because inevitably somebody's going to forget. They're not going to know how to rotate it, because 12 months from now is a long time, and who knows who's going to be in that position and if they're going to even remember, right? And so the industry kind of went to this super short TLS cert expiration windows, 30 days or less. And the reason for that is that you can't do that manually. I mean, I guess you could, but it sucks if you have to do that manually. So it kind of forces you to figure out how to rotate those certificates automatically. And if you do that, if you get that certificate automation process in place, then you don't have to worry about that outage that happens 12 months from now or 24 months from now when the person who ordered that TLS certificate forgets that it expires on that day. So that's the key, is we need to automate. And I think that is the crux for how we get ahead of AI development issues or AI-driven development issues that are cropping up. we need to do more automation. We need to get our tools in the right place at the right time so the developers are seeing the issues that are coming up. And then the last point I would say is, kind of going back earlier, don't treat vendors and tools as risk owners. They're great accelerants, but they're not risk owners. And if you're looking for that easy button, you're probably doing it wrong, and it's going to fail you. So kind of the primary message here is, I don't expect AI-driven development to make security engineers obsolete. I think there's always going to be a place for people who know security and know how to reason about it. I could be wrong about that. I hope I'm not. But I think it is very clearly making manual processes obsolete. If you're relying on manual processes to do security work, it's not going to scale. It's not going to continue to scale. And that backlog of vulnerabilities, that backlog of things that aren't getting checked and scanned and all of those things, it's going to continue to grow. And unfortunately, you're not going to be able to hire, I don't think you're going to be able to hire fast enough to get ahead of that. So the opportunity in my mind is pretty clear. It's to become that engineer who knows how to automate secure AI development, because that benefits not only the organization you're serving at this time, but it also benefits you, because it's building some future-proof skills. I unfortunately strongly believe that the days of just hiring, the land grab of security engineers, that's behind us, at least temporarily. Maybe permanently, I don't know. But what I'm seeing is organizations who want to hire fewer people who can do more because they understand how to build things with the tools that are available to us that weren't available back when you just had to hire somebody to do everything. So my plea is, or my opportunity here is to become that engineer, to start building those skills so that not only your organizations benefit, but you benefit in the long run. Okay. So that's pretty much it. Just a reminder, so we've got 2 more webinars coming up after this, the 4-layer AppSec automation stack. We're going to talk about my favorite free and open source tools that you can use to do these things, to start building out these automations that run the scans and the checks that you want to run and do it automatically. And then finally, that third one, next Wednesday, is going to be all about how to build those into GitHub Actions. And so we're going to actually dive into how to build GitHub Actions. I'm going to kind of tear that apart, show you how they work, where they're built. We'll build one live in that webinar, and then you'll come away with a GitHub repository that you can then use, and you can go build yourself. So now, if you're not on GitHub or GitHub Actions, that's okay. A lot of the techniques are the same. The principles are definitely the same. The terminology may differ from GitHub to GitLab to whatever you're using, but frankly, a lot of those things can be easily translated. If you come in, fire up your favorite AI tool and say, "Hey, I built this GitHub action. How do I do this in GitLab, or how do I do this in Jenkins, or whatever you're using?" It's pretty easy. Okay, and just one more reminder. I'm happy to take any questions, so go ahead and drop them in the chat now if you've got any, and then we'll go from there. But just another reminder, register. Those who register are going to get the slide deck at the end, so that it's one of the questions that's often asked is, "Hey, can I get these slides?" If you want it, just register. I've got an automation already set up. In an hour, it's going to send out an email with these things. It's going to send the links and materials that we talked about, and then you'll get that completion certificate. So if you're at the end of the year and you're like, "I need some CPEs for my CISSP or whatever," it's a great way to get an hour for free that you can submit. And then you'll get emails for the remaining reminders. So that's it. Thank you so much. I'm going to look at the chat now and see if there's any questions that have come in. So please go ahead and drop them in the chat if you haven't already. And I'll hang out for at least another 3 or 4 minutes. If we don't get any, we'll end early. And I guess, by the way, while I'm waiting for questions to come in, I do teach a course on this. I've got a course called DevSecOps Pro, which goes into these in greater detail. So we do things like dynamic scanning, static analysis with 2 different tools, software composition analysis, SBOMs, how to create or how to set up security in GitHub repositories, and how to do all of those things, and also how to develop the metrics and set up a dashboard. So, and with that, it's not just the training, it's also some hands-on labs. One of the reasons I set out to do this was there tends to be a lot of hand waving when it comes to labs in cybersecurity training, which I think is not really helpful. And so I wanted you to do this for real. And so everything that we do in these labs it's in your own GitHub repository. So you build out these workflows that do these things like deploy to AWS and scan using OWASP SAP, or spin up a SaaS scan. And so all of those things you build in your own repository with the real tools, with a sample vulnerable code repository. And so at the end of that, not only have you actually done it with the actual tools instead of like some contrived lab environment, but you have a kind of a portfolio of sorts that you can copy and paste in your organization if you need to, or if you're looking for a new job, you can show that to potential hiring managers and recruiters to show that you've actually built these things. And it's something it's verifiable, right? Because you can go and look at the commit history for your repository and see that you were actually the ones that committed those things and built that. So, okay. So last call for questions. All right. Oh, and I just realized my speaker circle is over the registration link, so I'll switch it quickly just in case anybody was struggling to write down the rest of that. Okay, well, again, thank you very much for coming. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions that may or provide any additional insight that may have not made sense during this webinar. Love to hear your feedback, what resonated, what didn't, what I could have done better. And if nothing else, I really hope to see you on the next one. Again, if I back up, next one is on Monday, 4-layer AppSec automation stack. And then the final one is on Wednesday, the 26th, where we're going to do that live GitHub action build. All right. Thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate it. Have a wonderful